We are now also heading to a guest via Zoom from from Washington, and it's Iran research analyst Janatan Sayeh. Thank you for being here. Good evening. And, we've heard a lot of talk from President Trump just in the past few days and then saying he's agreed to some kind of, structure. So how close is he to making a decision, and how is the not making a decision affecting or not affecting, the supreme leader of Iran?
From the supreme leader's perspective, they would try their best to turn this into a political issue. Given their tactical losses on the ground, they would try to appeal to a different Western audience by quote-unquote dragging America into this war. Of course, President Trump ran on a campaign to say that he's going to stop all wars. So they would definitely try to leverage that from a propaganda perspective to try to amplify pressure against Trump internally in the United States.
And how much has their military capabilities? We know from the news as to what the Israeli Air Force has been able to do. Of course, we've eliminated a lot of the top people, but overall, how much have their capabilities been degraded? And do they have real reason to fear if President Trump does decide to engage in this war with Israel?
They certainly have a real fear on that. So when we talk about Iran's military capabilities, it comes down to their ballistic missiles, of course, and Israelis are experiencing that firsthand. The issue with that is specifically the launchers. So the stockpiles aside that Israel has targeted, Iran continues to have the biggest arsenal of missiles in the Middle East. But given that Israel recently stated that they had eliminated 2/3 of the launchers, I think at this point Iran only has about 100 left. Another angle is just assessing how many rockets Iran is launching at Israel. Originally, they started about 100 to 200 per day, and now that number has declined a bit, which tells us that to an extent from their perspective, this is not necessarily sustainable because they don't have their manufacturing sites either. So they need to keep some missiles at least at hand in case America wishes to join the war.
And also, let's talk about the nuclear sites. We know that there was a lot accomplished on the part of the IDF throughout the day. How much damage has actually been inflicted, and is it enough to stall any kind of nuclear program?
It has definitely hindered their ability to continue their nuclear program. So we're talking about 4 main sites. We're talking about Iraq, in the center of the country, that is mostly a heavy water reactor that has been affected. I think today and yesterday, both days, there were heavy strikes against Iraq, the water facility. In addition to that, you have the Isfahan enrichment that has also again been targeted by Israel more than once, which brings us to the main one, which Fordo and Natanz. When we talk about Natanz, there's an overground section and there's an underground. The overground has been greatly injured or damaged, if you will. But when we talk about the underground capability, the assessment is that by targeting the electric grid, they were able to, quote unquote, disrupt the thousands of centrifuges that they have down there. The issue continues to be Fordo. Given that it's mostly underground, there's no real evidence of substantial damage against Fordo, even though there were heavy strikes. And that is the key issue that America is assessing to whether weigh in or not.
And talk about what would happen if Israel does attack Iran on the ground. Do they have any kind of air defense system, anything like that we have here in Israel to warn of these incidences?
That's what's rather surprising. So the Islamic Republic leadership, especially the IRGC, most of them are veterans of the Iran-Iraq War when Saddam Hussein was bombing Tehran. So you would assume that given their experience, they would install some sort of a, like you have like the radar system in Israel or the sirens, none of that. And we're hearing more and more concern from citizens inside saying that there is basically no infrastructure in place for us to know when air raids are happening. So in addition to that, of course, their air defense systems have been severely deteriorated. So Iran at this point, I think the best way to categorize it is that their skies are free for Israeli operations.
Now let's talk about the possibility of the regime falling. Of course, people calling to, we know where the supreme leader is, according to, Israel and President Trump. Is there a real possibility, given that so much of the infrastructure has been taken out?
The supreme leader is only a pillar of the Islamic Republic. Of course, the issue would be the IRGC specifically when it comes to regime change. There's different we're not just only talking about one apparatus. We're talking about a range of institutions. You have the LEF, which is the law enforcement that Israel stuck. So if the policy were to actually be regime change, which we're increasingly seeing signs of, for example, the hacking of the state-run TV and the targeting of different police stations across Tehran, that needs to be coupled with effective messaging towards Iranians, because it is challenging to expect Iranians to come to the streets as their air raid is taking place. So when it comes to the issue of regime change specifically, Khamenei's death would be definitely a catalyst, but it would not necessarily directly lead to regime change.
All right. Thank you very much, Jonathan, for your insight.
Thank you for having me.